Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Schneier of 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports, and I'm here with my co-host Nick Turchin, and this is the Big Blue Banter Podcast. We're back for what will likely be our most massive show yet. Obviously, the news broke last night about Odell Beckham Jr. Before we get into that, I wanted to throw it over to Nick and get his initial reaction and where he was when the news broke about Odell Beckham Jr.
My girlfriend and I were about to turn on The Bachelor, and quickly it went away from any Bachelor viewing into a massive tape study, which led into most of last night, into the morning.
Well, I'll commend you for the massive tape study that it led to, but I won't even comment on the fact that you watched The Bachelor, Nick. I guess
it's not me, it's my girlfriend. It is what it is. Monday.
I've heard that excuse before. But anyway, let's dive into the football side of this thing. So let's do the immediate trade reaction from the Odell Beckham Jr. trade. And the way I'm looking at this trade, Nick, and you can choose to look at it this way or not. I'm looking at it as one big trade, combining the trades the Giants and Browns made on Friday and Tuesday. So to me, the way I see, especially after learning that the teams basically agreed to swap back picks that they gave up in the Zeitler-Vernon trade, which to me makes it seem even more like it was just one big deal. But the way I'm seeing this, the Giants traded Odell Beckham Jr. and Olivier Vernon, and in return, they got Kevin Zeitler, Jabril Peppers, the number 17 overall pick, and the number 95 overall pick. So let me just get your initial reaction to the trade, Nick.
The very first thing, and I did say this on Twitter, I must sound like an idiot to people, but the first thing I thought was like, wow, Peppers is going to have a defense that he can play in. And know that Betcher is going to love having a guy like this, just from what I'd heard about him. So that was my first thing, was like, hey, what is this guy as good as people would think he might be, or as good as Don Brown, his college coach, says he is? The second part, and the almost bigger, one take that makes a lot more sense, is that how could there not be 2 first-round picks in this? It just doesn't. I thought 2 first-round picks and a player gets the deal done for the Giants side. And so to not see that is pretty much like, okay, so why trade him? What's the impetus?
Yeah, I think my initial reaction, Nick, is a little bit different than where I'm at right now with it. I will say this, and I never went live with this on Twitter or anywhere, and I know we talked about this off podcast, but I do have. I'm not going to reveal where it's from, but I was told about a month ago when the Landon Collins, Josina Anderson report dropped that both Collins wasn't going to get the tag, and that Odell Beckham was going to be traded. That was about a month ago. I didn't go anywhere with it. It was from one source, somebody who was close to the team, has someone close to the team. But I choose not to go with any of this stuff until I get at least 2-3 sources that are telling me things. But I still was shocked when I heard the news that he was traded, just because I thought the timing of it makes no sense. I think that what transpired with Odell Beckham Jr. in the last 7 months since signing his big contract with the Giants played a big role in this trade, Nick, no matter what anyone says from this point on. I mean, you look at what's happened since, and you have Dave Gettleman coming in as the general manager, someone who has basically made it an effort throughout his career as a general manager. And obviously it's not that long, but he's had some years with the Panthers and with the Giants to eliminate distractions from the roster. He believes that Odell Beckham is a distraction. I'm not going to sit here and debate if he is a distraction or not. We've talked about that at length, not only on this podcast, but I've done so since I started covering this beat. And the fact of the matter is this. I know from what I've heard, the Giants did not like the interview he did in the middle of the season, and they did not like him calling out the play calling after the loss to the Eagles. Those are 2 things I know. Now, what I don't know is how much of the decision was from ownership, John Mara, how much of the decision was from Dave Gettleman, and how much of the decision was from Pat Shurmur. I won't speculate on that. Instead, what I'm going to talk about is this, the value of the trade. I was with you, Nick. I believe that when you're trading a generational talent at wide receiver, you need to get 2 first-round picks back. Now, if Jabril Peppers Jabril Peppers was a first-round pick just 2 years ago, and if he can return the value that they probably are expecting him to, because likely the reason they traded for a player like Jabril Peppers is because they had a very high first-round grade on him back in 2017. There's no other reason why they would try to bring in a player like that. So if he can prove to provide first-round value for them and they hit on the first-round pick, there's a chance that they could turn this trade into no disaster. But, in the end, I'm with you. They should have got 2 first-round picks for a player like this. But I do think that the timing of this trade was pretty much bad luck for the Giants, in the sense that Antonio Brown just got traded for a 3 and a 5. And I think that also factored into it as well. But Nick, I will say this. Can you think back of one team in the last – you can go back as far as you want. Tell me one team that you can remember that made the Super Bowl. I'm not even just talking about Super Bowl winners, Nick. Either made the Super Bowl or won the Super Bowl that was carried by the play of a number one wide receiver.
Yeah, I think that actually is carried by the play of like in a high impact wide receiver and includes that game too. I guess you would obviously want to say too.
Yep. Even if you're not including that game, even just getting to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, just getting to. I mean, there are guys that have gone through stretches, but I mean, it's just a funky way to look at it, to look at that part of it. But yes, I know what you're saying because I'd have to go back. I mean, you're talking about a TO type of player,
right?
That's the football's changed and that's pushed to the slot now in terms of the most dangerous player in the field. It's in the slot now, so it's like okay, like it's not the same game, and so yeah, let's put it this way: is the spread ISO ball exists where one guy's dominating the catches, carries on running or passing. If is one receiver dominating and one running back dominating? No, not anymore. It's a ball distribution league for sure to many, many different players, in my opinion.
Yeah, and when I thought back about that last night, Nick, I thought I came to the same example, that Donovan McNabb, Terrell Owens season with the Eagles. And obviously, Owens didn't even play until the Super Bowl that year, but I do believe they got in that position because of the dominance of Owens. But even if you look at this Atlanta Falcons team that made the Super Bowl a couple years back, I talked to our Falcons writer on 24/7 Sports, and he agreed with me. I mean, he told me straight up, that team got there because of Kyle Shanahan calling the plays and because of Matt Ryan having a career year. Not because of Julio Jones. So I do believe from a roster building standpoint, Nick, this is not as detrimental. My issue with the trade is not getting rid of a number one wide receiver and trying to build the roster through the trenches and with a play action passing game. My issue is the value they got, and it always will be. And my issue, in addition to that, is the timing of the trade because it really shows that the Giants don't have a plan. And that kind of goes back to their decision on Landon Collins. The decision to pay Landon Collins, obviously he made 6 years, $84 million, whatever it was. Decision to pay Landon Collins or not to pay Landon Collins should not have been made at the start of this free agency. It should have been made months ago. They have years worth of game film on him. They know exactly what kind of injury history he has. They have all the medicals. They know everything. They know what they want to pay the safety position. That should not be something that pops up in their heads, when the time comes. So they should have traded him before last deadline. No matter what they got, that decision should have been made. And this is the same thing with Beckham. In 7 months since he signed this contract, I don't care what interview he did with Lil Wayne or whatever. I don't care what happened in the locker room after the Eagles game, them calling out the play calling. Nothing should change in the 7 months. And to me, the biggest problem I have with this trade, Nick, is that it shows the Giants don't have a clear plan going forward.
Yeah, I think that guys get so obsessed with dead cap, and it's like this constant dead cap conversation. And to your point, it's like the amount of OBJ dead cap that goes into this one transaction, like it makes the Manning this year's Manning dead cap look like nothing. And that's what, to me, just that's what the biggest striking thing to me is like, yeah, there's no way you'd ever want to. This was not a plan. This was a reactionary or a move after the fact. And that whenever you start doing those types of things, I don't know. We're never gonna have that color as to why it really got to this point. But I'd have to agree, basically, right? Like, how can anyone not agree? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And the other side of it too is like on the Collins side. The guys that keep on talking about the third round comp pick that they may get next year. Well, you don't want to like hinder yourself in the current free agent rebuilding market, worrying about the third round comp pick that you may get next year. Like, that's just not how you do business. It's like so people keep on finding the little details on Twitter to kind of say, hey, like, well, there's still this avenue through that makes sense. It's like, no, it really doesn't. At least from where I see. So yeah, no, totally agree there.
And the Giants are going to have, going into this 2019 season, it's essentially a season that's already punted. I didn't believe that the Giants had to punt this 2019 season, Nick. I know a lot of people felt like they had no chance to win in 2019, but I actually felt like if they could land an upgrade at quarterback, they could have won during the 2019 season. I know it seems ridiculous based on where the defense stands, but at the same time, I watched the Dallas Cowboys team 2 years ago win 14 games in the NFL without a good defense by just controlling the ball and keeping the ball out of their defense's hands and scoring enough points on offense. So I did believe it was possible to not punt 2019 if they upgraded at quarterback. Now, it's hard to believe that's possible when you consider the fact that 20% of their salary cap space is dead money this year. $33 million in dead money. You can't build a winning roster, at least for 2019, $33 million in dead money. And then when you factor in the extra, $23 million against the cap that Eli is set to make, and we'll get into that next. That's almost 30, it's more than 30% of your roster tied up to dead cap, tied up to players who aren't on your team and to a 39-year-old quarterback. So, I mean, if the plan with the Giants is to seriously start to, look at this 2019 season as just a purely rebuilding year, which is something that, NFL Twitter GMs, whatever you want to call them, believe is a smart move. And I think me and you would agree it's not a bad move to try to not punt the season. I hate the word punt, Nick, but to try to look forward, I would say, to your future. Then it makes a lot more sense. And that kind of gets into my next point, Nick. Fallout from the Odell Beckham trade with Eli Manning. At the end of the season, before the offseason, before Gettleman, basically all but committed to Manning as his starter, which, we'll still find out more on. Archie Manning, Eli's dad, said, if Eli's going to come back, the Giants have to win. He doesn't want to go through another season like he just went through. Well, Nick, guess what? We just talked about it. The Giants have dead cap spewed everywhere on this roster. The Giants are not preparing Manning or any quarterback for any kind of winning situation in 2019. So that leads me to question this, Nick. The Giants still have another, 72, 80, however many hours to make this roster decision on Manning. If they release him before March 17th, they'll recoup $17 million in cap space, but that doesn't really matter at this point when you consider it, where this team is headed for the 2019 season. It matters more for 2020. But do you think there's a chance now that the Giants could kind of walk back that Manning decision and release him before the 17th?
I think that my honest guess, and this may be a little bit more out from right field, I think that they don't cut Manning. I think that they draft a quarterback and Manning retires before OTAs. And they are left with the quarterback they drafted, Kyle Lauletta and Alex Tanney.
Well, that's an interesting take right there, Nick. I like that's a bold one.
Just because I think that we just talked about for 10 minutes how there's no plan. I think we're right. I think they're kind of trying to work through this. And I think that Manning kind of wants to see how it pans out a little bit. I think that's why he played last year, right? The guy's a competitor. He wants to be there. And we both know where we stand on that. But I just think that I don't think that they're going to cut the tie. And I don't think that he's ready to cut the tie until it kind of is the realities in his face of going back to basically spring ball with a quarterback there who's basically kind of like, waiting in the wings to take over. And I don't think he's going to want to do that. That's just a gut feel.
That's interesting because in that scenario, he waits for that draft to play out to see if the Giants acquire a quarterback, which does make sense because, I totally get your point on that. But I'm more so than ever, Nick. I think there's a decent reality that Manning is released before March 17th. I think at this point, the Giants can't really guarantee him any great chance to win. I know, whatever you want to say about Manning's relationship with Odell Beckham Jr., and I've heard some stuff to suggest that Manning was, more annoyed by Beckham's, the interview and the antics, and then he led on. Whatever you want to make of that, Manning knows what kind of impact Odell Beckham Jr. makes for him as a quarterback. You know what I mean? Like he's the quarterback's best friend on the field, no matter what you can say about him on or off the field. So I would say that, if he looks at this roster heading into 2019 and the holes on the defensive side of the ball and now the hole at receiver, it's hard for me to imagine that he would want to come back to that because, it's not a situation where the Giants are going to give him a contract extension, I don't think. So he will be entering a season essentially as a lame duck quarterback with a roster that's not ready to compete. And if his goal was, to be there and help the team get ready to compete in 2020, it only makes sense if they would re-sign him. Would you agree with that at least?
Oh yeah, no, and I'm more taking my side of where my point is just like a long shot. The rational mind is thinking the way you're thinking. If I'm Manning, I don't know why you want to stay on the roster at this point. Just to what you're saying, it doesn't. There's not a clear way through, and you're losing offensive assets. It's that simple.
All right. Well, more fallout that I'm going to jump into from this Odell Beckham Jr. trade is the potential speculation, of course, that the Giants could make a move for Josh Rosen. Nick, obviously, we weren't doing this podcast last year when I did my pre-draft evaluations on the quarterback class and basically made the case for the Giants to select either Josh Rosen or Sam Darnold. To me, the choice was clear at number 2 overall. You take Rosen or you take Darnold. You don't look back. You don't worry about trading it back or anything like that. And you obviously don't take Saquon Barkley. Obviously, it didn't go in that direction. But at this point, if the Cardinals if the Cardinals are sold on Kyler Murray, and obviously this is something, we really don't know too much about. Obviously, all the context supports the possibility that they're sold on Murray, but it's not something that, anyone can say with any kind of certainty. I do believe the Giants would be in a prime position to trade for Josh Rosen. I think the Giants are one of a few teams that could trade for Rosen, including the Miami Dolphins, New England Patriots, and the Washington Redskins. Those are teams that make the most sense to me. I know a lot of people ruled out the Redskins after the Case Keenum trade, but to me, that's not something that would preclude them from trading for a quarterback like Rosen, especially when you consider the fact that any team that trades for Josh Rosen right now is not taking on much of a financial burden, because the Cardinals have paid out most of his bonus money, and he's under contract for an extremely team-friendly price for the next 3 seasons. And then after that, the team has a contract option on him, which essentially, if he does hit and reach his peak, he would basically be, a bargain at that 5th-year team option, which would be a price for the 10th overall pick. I believe it would be in the $10 million range. I'm not exactly sure. I can double check that later on. But the point of this is, do you think, Nick, that there's a chance the Giants do swing a trade for Josh Rosen? What do you think would be a fair value, or where do you think they would be headed as far as compensation in a trade for Rosen?
I definitely think it's possible. I think their bid has to stay with their 2nd-round pick. I don't think their bid can go above a 2nd-round pick. Their current existing, 37th overall? Their current that pick, I don't think they can go. They can move above that, and they should basically. I think that's my top. I guess I'm saying in terms of a best bid that I would have for Rosen.
Yeah, I mean, we look at this a little differently, Nick. I think mostly based on the fact that, what you'd be getting. I see so much upside in trading for Rosen, not only based on my evaluation of him, but also because he costs nothing against the cap, considering, how much of his bonus has already been paid out by the Cardinals. And based on the fact that it would be such an incredible roster bargain moving forward for the Giants, and we'll get to this later, but a team that is expected to have an incredible amount of salary cap space next offseason, I believe that adds value to trading for somebody like that. You're taking a swing on him, but at the same time, you can also move on from him faster if he's not successful, and if he doesn't hit the way you want him to, because of how little cap space you're invested in him. So with that said, Nick, I would actually be willing to dangle that number 17 overall pick, but I hope the Giants don't bid against themselves in that matter, because like I said earlier, I don't think there are too many teams that can seriously trade for him, and I don't think the Miami Dolphins would offer their 1st-round pick for him, because they didn't make a move to trade up for him in the last draft, and they were in a pretty similar situation from a quarterback standpoint in the last draft. So that's kind of where I stand on that one. But I think overall, Nick, the most likely scenario, at least in my mind, would be the Giants trading up for a quarterback with the newly acquired 1st-round pick. If that's the case, would you think there would be good value for the Giants based on what you've seen from Kyler Murray and Dwayne Haskins to trade up for Kyler Murray or Dwayne Haskins?
Yeah, and I think that it more has to do with, well, not more, but just I think that I think there's a much higher probability that's what happens, and I definitely think they're both are worth it. Both are worth it, and especially if they get behind both, and yeah, absolutely. And I don't know what the package would look like, other than, because it really depends, I guess, what Arizona wants to do, and if they want Haskins or not. And I really think that it will happen. I think Haskins can be that guy for sure.
So here's where I stand on this, Nick. I'm not as sold as you are on Haskins. I'm not at a point right now where I would want to trade up for Haskins. At the same time, I am at a point right now where I would be fine if the Giants did decide to trade up for Kyler Murray. To me, I think that from what I've seen, Kyler Murray is just – we went over this on the last podcast, so I don't need to dive too much more into it. But I just think from an arm talent standpoint, he has so much more upside than Dwayne Haskins. And I believe that, he's the type of quarterback to me that can make up for lack of talent at wide receiver with his arm talent. So that's basically where I stand on that. But I think we can both agree, Nick, on the nightmare scenario for the Giants, which is staying at 6 and 17, drafting a defensive star at 6, and then using the 17th overall pick on Daniel Jones.
Yeah, and that's assuming that Jones would be there. And I think that if you're gonna be a 1st-round quarterback, I just think there's no way that Gettleman would play that game of hoping he fell. Daniel Jones, that is, and if he really felt that strongly about him. I just think that that's not in his style.
Yeah.
Delvin seems to be the kind of guy that when he starts doing something, he wants to get it done, right? Like, apparently that's like the one thing you can understand about the guy, that when the ball gets rolling, it really gets rolling.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's kind of that's a tough spot to be in, and I don't think that, obviously, since the free agency, the first couple of days of free agency have gone by without them acquiring another quarterback in general, that basically the Jones is actually off the board because of that.
I think that's a fair way to look at this, Nick. And I know, I bring it up as a nightmare scenario because just for me, it's a nightmare scenario. I think Jones is just a max out quarterback to me. I think he's got great, he's doing well with the mechanics and footwork and everything. But to me, that's almost the negative, Nick. The way I see it is a lot of what you see good from him is because he's so far advanced from in ways where some of these other quarterbacks are more raw. But to me, Jones has no upside long term for any team that drafts him. No real upside, at least. I think he could be a playoff quarterback. I don't think he can be a Super Bowl winning quarterback unless, everything is right around him. So I would be disappointed if the Giants did that. But I think in the end, what you said is probably the most accurate thing. Gettleman, when he does find his quarterback, is probably going to trade up for him. I think we know that, or make a trade for him if it's for Rosen or whatnot. But let's pivot a little here, Nick, and dive into a little bit of what you've seen from the chance you've had to dive into some of the All-22 and the game film on some of the newly acquired Giants. So let's start right away with Kevin Zeitler.
Yeah, Zeitler, big dude, 6'4", 315, Wisconsin guy from your neck of the woods over there. Was only a 3-star recruit coming out of college. But this kid, and again, this is not this kid, he's a guy. This guy is kind of like lost a little bit now at this point, just because it's been such a crazy couple of days. But guy's got some really, really good traits that the Giants are going to like. He's super athletic for a guard, and I know he didn't play tackle at Wisconsin, or at least start for any considerable amount of time, but he looks that way in his stance. He's kind of upright a little bit, very, very athletic, rangy in terms of the short area, and his play speed is very, very good. He's very, very savvy in both pass protection and run blocking. To be honest, it's not to, of course, everyone's minds immediately go to like, what's the comparison to, how does he compare to Jamon Brown? And I would say it's like where Brown was very kind of like nimble and athletic, and that's where his athleticism was kind of was based in for a very, very big guy. The best way to describe Zeitler is he's the guy that you do not want to have a fist fight with in a phone booth. This guy's functional strength when you're in close to him is like absolutely out of control. I don't know if you guys follow him on Instagram, but he was at a Disturbed concert on his birthday, and that's the best way for me to describe him on tape. It's like listening to Disturbed, watch him play. What is a little interesting about that is he's not a crazy finisher. He's not like a guy who's going to bury the guy in the ground and have those type of Hernandez clips that guys have seen from UTEP and this year at the Giants, where, he's taking a guy to the ground every single play. It's more like he's going to basically lock someone up. And if someone gets inside of him, there's very little chance that they can break away. A couple weaknesses just real quick. Climbing to the second level was an issue for him coming out of college. He has absolutely improved that. He's absolutely improved his ability to take certain angles on linebackers, on defensive backs. He has that athleticism. But what's weird is when he takes them on, he's not nearly as aggressive as he is with bigger players closer to the line of scrimmage. I think part of that is to his tendency where he wants to get guys in close and basically just kind of like grab them by the collar almost to kind of take a normal everyday term and apply it to an offensive lineman. So I think that when he doesn't like to extend his hands to guys that are quicker than him that he can kind of lose too quickly. And so he doesn't lose often, but I'm just a little wary about some of his climbs to the second level. And the questions I have are in the screen game, because I talked about how he's mobile, but again, this issue with getting downhill and actually staying on guys, or at least getting a piece, because it's very hard for an offensive lineman to get a defensive back basically in the screen, to actually touch him in the screen game. I didn't see a ton of screens coming on the from Cleveland this past year, so I have a couple questions there, and a couple questions with his first strike. If he's got to be that guy that's got to be a dual read guard and read a blitz, that type of thing. Again, he wants to be that he wants to have that fist fight in the phone booth. Yeah,
no doubt. And Zeitler, obviously, as you mentioned, played at Wisconsin with the Badgers, and I was obviously there at Wisconsin. And he was a player who I thought was when he came into the draft, I thought he was a surefire player. Just, when you come into Wisconsin, like you said, he never actually played tackle there, but he got experience everywhere. When you go to Wisconsin, you may not be – a lot of the times these guys that end up being excellent pros in the NFL and excellent linemen at Wisconsin, the Big Ten, come in as three or four-star recruits. Really what they do up there is an excellent job of developing linemen from both a technique standpoint and everything else that goes into it, the fundamentals of playing the position. And so my question for you, Nick, would be, last year the Giants ran an incredible amount of inside zone. We talked about this in the run game. Do you think that he fits the specific scheme the Giants run from a run blocking standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of left out in double teams, that functional strength comes out. It really flashes. So he's a guy that's going to gain ground, taking hip to hip in either an ace block or deuce block, and get that defensive tackle or whoever it is moving backwards. The climbing issue is more just very specific to him. If they're running a zone scheme where he's got to not engage the combination block and just go right to the second level. And again, he takes the right angle. It's not like I think the bigger issue the Giants have had actually in the past 2 years of having guys taking poor angles and not having the athleticism to get there. He can get there. So in terms of what they want to run, which is mostly inside zone, and let's say, a down block in power, because I'm envisioning they're going to want Hernandez to keep on pulling. Yeah, that type, he has that functional strength. He is going to gain ground, and especially against some pretty big dudes at 340 pounds. Oh, sorry, 315 pounds. I apologize.
No doubt about that. And I'm also excited about the fact that they now have a pretty damn good guard duo. If you expect that Will Hernandez will take a leap forward in year 2. And I think we can expect that from Will Hernandez for sure. But let's move on to another player who I think kind of got lost in this trade, a player who I'm pretty excited about. He was Pro Football Focus's number 18 overall safety last year, number 9 through week 15. After a rocky first season where he was kind of playing out of position, even in the second season last year, I don't believe he was in the perfect fit for him from a scheme standpoint. At Michigan, they used him all over the place around the line of scrimmage, in the deep half. We're talking about Jabril Peppers, former first-round pick, former top recruit, 5-star coming into Michigan, the best player I've ever watched live on a football field for New Jersey football. I had a chance to watch him at a high school football game years back, and I've never seen somebody dominate on a football field from an athletic standpoint more than Jabril Peppers. The first play of the game, he housed the kickoff return, where he just looked like he was playing Madden on easy level. So what do you think of Jabril Peppers, the safety the Giants got in this deal? Has kind of been lost in the fact that, a lot of people are talking about this. The Giants got a first and third round pick, but they also got a first round pick, or former first round pick, 2 years removed from being a first round pick. So let me hear it.
Yeah, I think I may be a little jaded because I just heard Don Brown at a clinic. Basically, every time he brought up Pepper's tape, it was like they don't make him like this anymore. And Brown talked about how Peppers it was hell bent on being a safety, but it was a tough stretch to get him to play Viper, which is their version of basically a safety linebacker hybrid. And he joked that he loved the name Viper because it basically fooled him into playing a linebacker and he didn't know it. He kind of, as you described, he's an athletic freak. His size is not impressive. He's only 210 pounds. When I say not impressive, meaning when you turn on his tape, the guy brings the lumber. He's incredibly physical. He plays bigger than his size, but it doesn't transfer into his body looking bigger. He looks like a small guy who's incredibly strong. So to simplify it for guys that don't want to get into all the technicalities, it's like he's the offspring of Landon Collins and Matthew. He's got a ton of twitch. He's jittery, but he's very assignment sound. He's very confident, and his play speed is all right. I'm going to go ahead and say it. His play speed's elite. His play speed is really, really good. He understands what he sees in front of him, basically most of the time. In Cleveland this past year, he was basically a deep safety or a box safety in the way that Williams views the rigid 4-3. And since Williams, Greg Williams likes to play so much 4-3, actually base, even against 11 personnel, it actually took Peppers off the field for a large part of the middle of the season. So that's why when guys look at his snap count, that's why his snap count is kind of reduced. Williams likes to rotate his DBs where they play entire series at positions. So if you're not in that rotation, you're not going to get in that whole series. And if it's a long series, it's going to basically skew the snap count. Just a little bit of context. It took me 45 minutes to wrap my head around. Anyway, really good on the line of scrimmage. Very, very good foot speed. The biggest thing people have to understand is he can match up to tight ends, man coverage. He's really good with his hands. He sticks at the hip. He's a little weak at the catch point. That's the only weak part of his overall his overall repertoire. But if you see, he flashes the ability to make crazy athletic plays. So I think it's just a matter of getting more consistent at that level. And I think the more this kid plays, the more you get him involved on a day-to-day basis, on a play-to-play basis, the better he is going to play, especially for a guy like Betcher, who's going to basically move him around. I think he's going to play the star/nickelback position to the field. I do think he is fast enough to stay with slot receivers at a time. I think he's going to base as the boundary safety on the other side, basically in Collins' role. He's not going to be I don't think he's as strong on the run on a consistent basis to move into the money backer position, which is a stack linebacker position in a 4-2 over front. But I do think that he can play around the line of scrimmage a lot as basically contain and as a guy who can make impact plays. And he's a guy you're going to want to design blitz packages around. His speed and his ability to dip and rip, taught by Don Brown, taught by really the best guy, in my opinion, to do that. The consistency of his pass rush is very, very good. This is a guy this guy can ball. This is not like a stretch to say, oh, he's like a toss in after two picks. It's like, no, this guy can play. And I think that, over time, I do think he can absolutely be a Pro Bowler for sure.
Yeah, Nick, you know where I'm at with this, because I've looked a little bit more into him. Not only, in where he graded out last season, but I've also tried to watch some of the clips on him and see where the Browns used him and all that. I think that there is, there's a reasonable path forward, and I'm not saying it's just yet, but when you consider the jump he made from year 1 to year 2, when you consider how kind of relatively new he is to playing the defensive side of the ball, and not necessarily new, but, experience-wise, he was used all over at Michigan and in high school. He wasn't, just like pure defensive player really until he came to the NFL. And I know he still, impacts the game on special teams at times. He could even help the Giants in the return game for sure. But based on the jump he made from year 1 to year 2 in the NFL, I don't think it's crazy to say that, in a year or two into his tenure with the Giants, he's going to be as impactful for this defense as Landon Collins was. And for this defense, I mean James Betcher's defense, not Steve Spagnuolo's defense in 2016, but James Betcher's defense. And do you think that's crazy to say?
No, the only difference I would say is where Collins would base himself closer to the line of scrimmage and with the potential to be a stack backer in Betcher's, play calling scheme. This guy is going to he's better in space. He's more comfortable in space as part of a too high structure, which, by the way, is what the bulk of what the Giants run.
Right.
And so I think that he gives you that almost added versatility, but I don't think you're getting. I guess the best way to say is if they had done this as well as signed Buchanan, then I think you kind of have really cooking, because you have an actual money backer and then you have the guy that can basically move around as the chess piece. So they don't have that yet, but that's kind of how I saw that coming together.
It's funny you say that, Nick, because I was literally just about to get into that. And I think that, they're not viewing Peppers in that role. They have ideas for where that's going to go. And I thought it might be Buchanan as well. I think in the end, the Giants, really stuck to wanting to sign him cheap for a prove-it deal. And I don't blame them for that, because he really hasn't been that great of a player since his rookie season. But I think that they have other plans for that. I think there are a lot of players in this draft class who could fit that role at 17 or at 37. You know what I mean by that? Maybe not a lot of players, but there's a few I got my eye on for sure.
In the first round, the only guy is Devin Bush, and he's a fellow.
Right. Bush, and what? And what about, you don't think White could play that role?
I think that he's a little big, and I think that he's the traditional Mike who's going to flourish on going sideline to sideline. But I think that the overall consistency of he's just not a Michigan guy. It's the overall his overall fundamentals. He's still pretty raw. His talent is crazy.
Yeah,
but you're gonna. I think it's not as carbon. It's not a plug and play as Bush is.
All right, maybe I'm just too enamored with Devin Bush, a player who I've been wanting the Giants to get for a long time. And maybe it's not easy. You don't want to lock into one player, but I do think the Giants have ideas from this draft class about how to fill that role, because it's a role that's not. We've talked about this on past podcasts, Nick, but it's a role that's not employed by every single defense. This is where the Giants could find value in a niche. We talked about this in building a defense different from how a lot of other teams in the NFL are viewing it. This position that you talk about, this money backer position, not every team has this position. And I'm not saying that I'm at the stage yet, and I want to get there, where I can pinpoint, 5 guys who can play this role in this draft. And I'm hoping we can get to that point, Nick, as we get closer to the draft and as we have more time to break down these guys. And, as we get closer, once free agency wraps up, we're going to be doing just pure draft podcasts. So I think we'll get there. But if they do have that plan in mind, then I think that Peppers, is an even bigger piece for this process, because it's much harder, in my opinion, to find a safety than someone who fits into that role.
Yeah, and I think this is what you're outlining is really why guys like me were so defending of Collins, understanding that you could spend 2 to 3 years with only 2 or 3 picks in the top 100 trying to find a guy like that again. It just doesn't really come along that ready unless if you're willing for that full developmental mode where it's a year to 2 out. Anyway, yeah, that makes sense.
But the Giants didn't only fill one of their 2 vacant safety positions yesterday. They filled the other with a player who I think was very underrated by initial reaction by Giants Twitter, based on what I've seen from him, not only in James Bettcher's defense dating back to 2017. Obviously, he played in a different scheme in 2018, and his production fell off a little bit. I mean, not his actual production, because he did set career highs in tackles and sacks last year, but his production overall. And we're talking about Antoine Bethea, the Giants' second safety, who they believe is going to kind of start immediately. Obviously, he's 35 years old. He's not a long-term solution, but I think he can be a solution for, a short stopgap window as they try to get the younger safeties that they either draft or we're talking about Chandler, Michael Thomas, more acclimated to playing more defensive snaps. What have you seen from Bethea, and do you think that my optimism on him is reasonable?
Yeah, it's reasonable, and I think that the age is kind of just the biggest factor, just knowing that he's 34, 35, right? 35, turns 35 in July.
Right.
He's kind of typecast as a free safety, as a middle of field safety, and that's how people remember firing up the Bettcher tape from 17 with the blitz, a lot of man blitzes that they ran, that he was kind of the guy in the backside. He has he's pretty aggressive in his reactions in terms of reading the quarterback. Probably not as aggressive as his counterpart Boston last year. They're actually both pretty similar, Trey Boston and he. If you fire up the 2018 tape. Anyway, he's a solid player. Can play down in the box. He's solid in the fit. I would just say his traits are not as high level as some of the other guys we mentioned earlier in the podcast, but his fundamentals are very, very strong. He can handle some tight ends in man coverage. I think his issues maybe kind of deal more with size. I think the bigger tight ends, they're not going to want to have him, rotate in on that side. But I think the biggest thing that we're talking about all these players, like we're saying, is versatility. Not one of these guys you can throw in one main thing and say, hey, he's just a rangy this that does this. It's like, no, they all can do things pretty well. Just the overall variant, the overall degree that Bethea can do them is basically a little less. And he's an impact player from a hands perspective and from an interception perspective. From his traits, his interceptions weren't necessarily like luck, or he creates basically on his own too. And what I liked is the ability last year, the confidence that they had last year, and to put him in man cover situations, because actually Wilkes likes to blitz a lot. And blitz with both zone and man behind it, and he hung in there. It was one of those things where I think if you compared him to everyone of the Giants last year from a coverage perspective in the defensive backfield that aren't corners, I think that he would basically be a top cover or safety for the Giants. So definitely a baseline upgrade there. Just overall, the only issues are just the long-termness, that he's just an older guy, and it's just not going to be basically more than 2 years.
Yeah, I think one point you harped on that I'm really most excited about is that the Giants will finally enter a season. And again, we know this is a stopgap. It's not a long-term solution, but they'll enter a season with safeties that are interchangeable. And I think that that's extremely important for James Bettcher's scheme and what he's trying to accomplish on the defensive side of the ball. But these aren't the only player movement for the Giants. The Giants also made the decision to tender John Halapio and then re-sign Spencer Pulley to a contract that to me is now looking like a bargain when you consider what every other offensive lineman on the market has gotten. And I'm looking at you, Bobby Hart. But what do you think of these two decisions, kind of, almost lock in essentially that you're going into 2019 at the center position, with the center position basically already filled, especially when you consider Evan Brown, the undrafted free agent they signed last year, is probably going to have a chance to also come back and compete.
Yeah, I'm not that surprised on the Halapio front, just because everything the commentary you hear is that they really like him and they like him as a developmental center. I'm actually kind of very surprised on the Pulley front, just because his play strength and his ability to kind of he wasn't a bad player, but he had issues in combination blocks for basic inside zone stuff, and he had issues in pass pro that, I didn't see him as that versatile guy, and I think that, I don't. I guess I don't know if they're going to draft anyone on the interior line. I thought that the interior line was set up this year in the draft where you could take a flyer on a 5th rounder and get the guy who has better play strength and pulling. And then you could kind of build on that, seeing that he would be a backup. So a little surprise on the Pulley side.
I can see that, Nick, but I also think there is some in value on the offensive line to continuity, just from what we've seen over the years. I think there is some added value there that could be playing a role in this. But, I can agree with you from the point that I haven't been extremely impressed with Pulley, but I think at the deal they signed him for, I'm fine with moving forward with that, with the expectation that he's mostly going to be depth with, and Jalapio, they believe, will take that next step forward. But obviously there's other movement for the Giants, Nick. So I wanted to talk to you a little about what your thoughts were on the initial contract that Landon Collins signed. I know you're a very, very big Landon Collins supporter, obviously of his game and of his impact on the Giants and what he meant to the franchise. Do you think that the Giants, should have, if the Giants were going to keep him, they were going to re-sign him. They weren't going to put him under the tag. That was obvious. That's just not the business that they wanted to do. Do you think that he would have been, I don't want to say value, but do you think he would have been an asset at the contract he signed with the Redskins? Because no one should be fooled into think that, that Collins' agent didn't know what he was going to get on the open market before the Giants decided to move on from him. He knew. He told the Giants that what the expectations were, and they went from there. So what do you think about kind of the contract and where it's at, and the question I asked with regards to that?
Yeah, I think it's great to see. It's great to see a guy get paid. It's great to understand the dynamics of why he doesn't want to go down the tag route. Like, there's only so many opportunities you have to get paid, and there are no guarantees, basically. So, he basically got paid triple or quadruple the 12 or the 11 million that he would have gotten in terms of guaranteed money for a 1-year tag deal. So I get it. I guess what you're kind of trying to see is, like, would the Giants have had to sign him at a discount to what the other best offer would be for his services? Yeah, they probably would have had to do that. And that's just how the market kind of moves for players and free agents that, that play well and that guys value elsewhere. And that's part of how, I don't know, it's part of the tough part of the NFL and understanding how you want to, and how you want to develop relationships and develop your young people. And I think that the harder part almost is that I still think the harder part of the conversation is not wanting to have the conversation with the leader, because of the message that sends to the locker room. But I'm not in the locker room. That's just more of that judgment. And I think overall that, would, for him to stay, would would their bid have been a discount, and maybe for the right reason? Yeah, but they weren't even willing to entertain that.
Yeah, I think where I stand on it, Nick, is that while I don't think he actually signed a contract that is an excellent value for the player I think that something has to be going on more behind the scenes as far as injuries go, or potentially even just, off-field stuff for the Giants' decision to move on from him, because especially knowing what we know now, that they, have cleared out all this salary cap space moving forward for the 2020 season, you can afford to maybe overpay, if that's what it would be, for a player like Collins. And like you just broke down, Nick, if they had kept Collins, let's say they did re-sign him for 6 years, $84 million to be on the Giants, that doesn't mean they couldn't have traded for Jabril Peppers. We just went into how they could play different positions within the scheme. And I know you would agree with that, correct?
Yeah, no, that's the whole goal, is to get like depth at the DB position that can do
DB position, versatility, players who can play multiple roles within this scheme, right?
Yeah, no, 100%.
Exactly. So that's really where I stand with why I was disappointed in the decision not to pay him. But I can't honestly say that I know exactly what the situation with his injuries moving forward is. I don't think it's anything serious, because the Redskins signed him to a huge deal. But or the off-field stuff. But that's kind of where I stand. I think that the Giants could have afforded essentially to pay a lot of money and allocate a lot of cap space to a safety, considering where they will be moving forward with the salary cap, especially when you consider their ultimate goal is to target a quarterback on a rookie contract. But we'll move on to another player who was also signed as a former Giants free agent. We're talking about Jamon Brown, who signed, I believe it was a 3-year, $18.7 million contract with the Atlanta Falcons. Obviously, a lot more than Spencer Pulley got paid, but obviously different players. What did you think of that deal, and what did you think? Did you think that there was anything the Giants did wrong in this situation, I guess I would say?
No, I think when you have the chance to upgrade to Zeitler, who I would put above him in terms of overall talent, you get a chance to do that with a guy who the contract is friendly to many parties involved in that whole transaction. And I think Brown played honestly played solid when he was here. I didn't expect more. I think he would have played better with a whole season under his belt and a whole training camp, et cetera, et cetera. And you certainly see him on the social media side of things. He's an upbeat guy. He's very, he's a team guy. So I think it's a good signing. I think him and Carpenter down in Atlanta are going to do better than people realize.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I think that it worked out for both sides, though, Nick, because I do believe there was an upgrade, and there's obviously no more guaranteed money tied to his deal from the Giants side. And the Giants, didn't. You can't sign someone to a 3-year, $18 million contract to be on the bench. That's just not the dynamics of it. So unless the Giants felt like there was a viable route to put him at right tackle, which I don't believe they felt, it just worked out how I thought it would. But I kind of wanted to dive a little into before we got into questions from the listeners. I wanted to dive into the salary cap outlook for 2019 and 2020, Nick. So obviously we already went into 2019 cap situation. The Giants have, like I said, 20% of their salary cap tied up to dead money, 30% total when you consider Eli's contract. But in 2020, Nick, the Giants are set to have currently $90 million in salary cap space. Now, once the cap goes up, that number could get closer to $100 million in cap space. In addition to that, the Giants can save all but $3.5 million in dead cap by releasing Janoris Jenkins next offseason. That would be another $11 million in salary cap space if they chose to go that route. In addition to that, the Giants could save all but $3.5 million, and that's another $12 million in cap space by releasing Alec Ogletree if he doesn't work out. So when you look at this situation with this team, they're clearing. And by the way, I didn't even touch on the fact that if they do keep him, Nick, they could also clear. If they do keep them, Nick, they could also clear another 6.2 and another $6 million with only a total of $3 million in dead cap from releasing Rhett Ellison and Kareem Martin. So really, this team is positioned in the 2020 offseason to make a big run at players if they want to. So I think with regards to everything they've done, and we've talked a lot about how we don't think they have a clear plan. A lot of the decisions are reactionary. There is no way really to get around the fact that they have set themselves up in a very nice position from a salary cap standpoint. Would you at least agree with that?
Yeah. I think that's where I think the guys who are frustrated about the plan are thinking about the last 18 months and then the way to kind of backdoor into that where you could have started that whole process earlier. But that is what it is. I mean, and the point is, yes, in 2020, they're going to have basically maybe still a lot of holes and a lot of ammo.
They're going to have a lot of holes, Nick, but they're also going to have a surprising amount of kind of talent on that roster for when you consider the fact that they could have up to like $130 million if they make some of the moves we talked about, or even more if they cut all those guys, because they're still going to have, even within that $130 million. Let's say they cut all 4 of those players, which I don't think they'll do, but let's say they did cut Jenkins, Ogletree, Ellison, and Martin right there. So then if they made those moves per se, they would get back 11, 8, 9, 20, about $32 million plus what you would prorate the cap going up. They would have like $130 million to spend with Evan Ingram already on the roster still, Zeitler, Barkley, Solder, Hernandez, Peppers, Tomlinson, Carter, Beal, BJ Hill, and then kind of, more secondary players as you move on. There's still a ton of holes there where we talk about, but then there's also a ton of cap space. And in addition to that, most importantly, Nick, there's not many bad contracts at that point. If they go that route, the only really bad contracts that they would have still remaining on their 2020 roster or their cap going forward would be the guys we talked about who they might release. So I think that's really where the Giants are in position to kind of strike it, or where the Giants, I guess I would say, are in a good salary cap position, just from the standpoint of they don't really have any bad contracts after the season.
Yeah, and I think the only other point I would add to that, though, is that the player development side has to continue to improve. They have to, from guys that they have from the draft to guys that they get in free agency at all levels, have to basically, the other way to think about this is, I know we're trying to forget last year, but look at all the free agents that they brought in last year that did not produce anything. You can't have those types of whiffs because it all adds up, and then it reduces your level of need that you have when you then go to spend that money that you will have in 2020. So I guess I'm not willing to say like, hey, like 2019 doesn't mean anything, but to your point of looking to the future, I think 2019 means a ton for them to actually get production from spots that you wouldn't think of, I guess is what I'm saying.
Sure. I can agree with you on that for sure. But I also think leading into that, Nick, before we dive into some of the questions that everybody has for us, it doesn't their 2020 cap space and their 2019 cap space is not what precluded them from signing Preston Smith or Zadarius Smith or any of the guys they were rumored to be interested in. I think they decided not to sign those guys because they didn't think that they were worth the price that they were getting paid from other teams. Because if you look at it, sure, the Giants only have about $30 million in cap space remaining for 2019, but any deal they sign now can be structured so that the cap hit is minimal now and pushed back into 2020 and 2021 and years beyond where they have all this cap space. So I do believe that there's a chance they could still sign a guy like Darrell Williams once he comes in for to visit teams to take a physical. And really, any Marcus Golden, maybe, I mean, that's not a player I would want to sign for a big deal, but I don't think they're out of the market to sign any big contracts based on how free their cap space is beyond the season and how easy it is to just structure a contract so the cap hit is more weighted towards later years in the deal.
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely a good point.
Sure. Okay. All right. Let's move on because we got a lot of these, and we're going to start getting to them now. A lot of questions from the fans today, which is awesome. Like we've talked about before, this is the best part about doing the show. So we'll start with Dodge, who's a longtime listener of the show and definitely one of my favorites because we've spoken a lot off air about the Giants. So he asks, how many years? I think this one's a joke, Nick, but how many years does Eli now get extended?
Yeah, right. No.
Is it possible? Here's an interesting one. Is it possible for this team to win now? So I do believe he means in 2019 with Eli. And then it's a three-part question. He says, where does the pass rush come from, and where will the defense be the downfall next year? But let's answer that first one because I think that's an interesting hypothetical. Is it possible for the team to win in 2019 with Eli?
No, not with. Not unless if there's some massive change in the play, in the play in the back half of the season. That if there's a massive, if he has the best season he's ever had in his life, better than 11-12, then that's not going to happen. So I would say no.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what he means by win. Like, if he means let's take it as he means make the playoffs or like make the playoffs and be competitive in the playoffs, not necessarily maybe make a run, but be competitive in any game they play in the playoffs. I would say no to that question. I think there's a chance. I know you'd find this crazy, Nick, but I think there's a chance they could win more than 5 games with this roster and Eli. I really do believe that. And I know it sounds crazy, but this team wasn't that bad. There wasn't that bad on offense in the games without Odell Beckham Jr. last year. I know it's crazy to say. And I know there's so much context that goes into the defenses they played in that span. But they did also in that span play the Titans, a defense who obviously fooled Eli Manning. We talked about that on the podcast after that with a lot of the pre-snap looks and a lot of bluffing things that they ended up doing. But I think that with how easy the Giants' schedule should be next year, it's possible for them to win more games. But I will agree, unless he returns to 2011 form, Eli, which he's not going to return to, they can't actually make a run with him on the roster. All right, Gary Hartman asks, what do you see the Giants doing now at wide receiver? They're incredibly thin outside of Sterling Shepard.
I don't know if I had enough time to really. I think they have. I think they'd be smart to re-sign Latimer.
Oh yeah.
I guess they're not going to. I don't know. I mean,
no.
I guess that's still a possibility. And in terms of playmakers, I look at it 2 ways. If you have a guy who can distribute the ball on time where it needs to be, who has just enough arm and is super strong between the ears, yeah, they don't need some crazy level of talent at wide receiver 1 in terms of like spending draft capital or free agent capital. If you don't have that, I think you got to have talent. So, it's kind of one or the other. I don't think the free agent market right now is going to dictate that they can get that wide receiver 1 guy. Again, we don't know. There was some chatter that there's more trades or whatever to come. But, I think that the QB is the main way to – the QB can make all wide receivers 1 through 3 where they need to be, I think, in any system, quote unquote.
Yeah, Nick, and I know we've talked a lot about this off air. So Gary, and I know I've talked to you about this on Twitter, but I'm even more on that side of the boat than Nick is. I don't believe the Giants need to do much at wide receiver as far as spending capital. I don't mind them using that 3rd round pick on wide receiver if they like one. I don't mind them going after a few guys they like in free agency. I think I'm with Nick. I hope they re-sign Latimer. But I think that the main way to build this roster out is with the quarterback first. They have to find a quarterback and then continue to build the trenches in addition to that. And I believe that the Giants' weapons are a bit underrated right now. They still have Barkley, Ingram, and Shepard. These are three players who are good receivers, regardless of what you want to say about the impact Beckham made or didn't make. These guys are good players. And yeah, sure, not only one of them technically plays wide receiver, but all of them are involved in the passing game, and all of them will continue to be even more involved in the passing game. Ingram, who would have been way more involved if not for the injury last year. We know that based on how involved he was down the stretch of the last season. Barkley, who only got even more involved in the passing game as he got more acclimated to the NFL game. So we're talking about those three guys. And then you also, if you bring back Latimer, potentially Corey Coleman, I personally would not even consider using one of the 2 first-round picks at wide receiver. That's how I would build a roster out under no circumstances. When you look at the last 6 draft classes or 5 draft classes since the 2014 year that hit, and then when you even compare, when you look even further back than that and go all deeper back, like a decade back, and take out that 2014 class where obviously, Mike Evans and Odell Beckham hit, among others, the bust rate at the wide receiver position in the first round of the NFL draft is higher than any other position in the NFL. So what you're doing there is you're going against the grain and you're hoping that you can be the team that finds the outlier at wide receiver. You can be the team that finds some playmaker. And even then, you go back to what Nick said. Does it really even matter when you have a quarterback who can read the defense and distribute the ball well? And then doubling back down on that, even more reason why I don't want the Giants to go in this route. Look at Dave Gettleman's track record for evaluating wide receivers. It's not pretty, guys. He's good at evaluating other positions. Receiver's not one of them. So to me, I don't think the Giants have any kind of desperation at the wide receiver position after this trade. Marcel asks, I trusted DG, I did. But moving all these guys in counterintuitive. With picks 6, 17, 37, our third rounder and multiple 4s and 5s, where do we go? How many of these picks need to be successful for the Giants to get back on track?
I don't think at this point the overall success is going to be the picks that we know and we see. There's only 3 in the top 100. A first rounder is roughly 50% of a success rate. How do you define success? That's a whole other conversation.
Right.
They need more. It's not going to be through the draft alone, through this draft alone, unless if they somehow get 2 more picks in the top 100. It just is what it is. I think it's that part of it is going to take a lot more time.
Yeah, it's going to take time. It's got to be patience. Like we've talked about before, the best NFL teams make the decision to build their roster via the draft and then supplement it in free agency. So it's going to take stacking multiple strong draft classes. We look at the 2018 class, the first class of Dave Gettleman's regime, and it's for all the faults you can say about his decision making when it comes to trades or signing free agents. He did prove to at least have a pretty decent, at worst, let's say decent, because I know nobody wants to give credit for anything. When it comes to evaluating talent, he got B.J. Hill in the 3rd round. That was a great pick. That was a great find. Will Hernandez, people say it was the easiest pick to make, but then why didn't all the teams why didn't anybody take him before the Giants did at number 34 overall? I can think of at least 2 handfuls of players who were selected in the 1st round who Hernandez should have been taken before. Lorenzo Carter, the jury's still out on, but you got to like what you've seen so far there too. And then obviously Barkley's a whole nother story based on where they selected him. But at the very worst, he's a great talent. So I think it's going to take stacking draft classes for sure, but it's too early to say. It's a process for sure. Ian Bromberg asks, if you were the GM right now, what would you do with the 6th and 17th pick? And are there any free agents you would sign who are still on the market? Me on the spot, Nick.
The play GM questions are really funny because it's like literally like with incomplete information. So with the 6th pick, I would find a way to get the quarterback that you want. I would hope that wouldn't including using the 17th pick. If you still have the 17th pick and you have a shot on a guy, you have to find a way to get the pass rusher. Even if that means finding him over Devin Bush, who I think would be a great fit for this defense. I just think that the pass rusher has to be addressed, and that's the weakness that they have right now. Because the pass rusher, the same way a quarterback can make the whole wide receiver group better, the pass rusher can make the entire defense, including the secondary, competent. They're not there yet. So I think those are what the 2 main objectives are. And I think if you wait to the 2nd round for that pass rusher in this draft, it's deep, but you're not going to get the production you need in week 1. So yeah, I think that's going to be the way it is, and I think they do have to as well take a look at market a guy like Golden as a pass rusher, because I think they have to at least find some way to address the need before they go in and go into the draft as well.
I like that answer, Nick. Mine's a little bit different than yours, but if I'm GM of the Giants right now, I am addressing pass rusher before the draft. I'll start with that. I'm taking the cheaper of the two from Shaquille Barrett or Marcus Golden. I'm also strongly considering spending, what might likely end up being big time money to upgrade right tackle immediately with Darrell Williams, like we talked about. Giants are committed basically nothing to their 2020 cap. They don't have any bad contracts coming in 2020. So I think that they can take a chance on a player who was injured in 2018 but dominant basically in 2017. As far as the draft picks go, I'm taking the best pass rusher at 6 personally. I'm trading the 37th overall pick for Josh Rosen, and I'm taking at 17. I am taking maybe Devin Bush. I'm maybe taking Dalton Reisner because I do believe, you can never have too many linemen. Even if they do sign Darrell Williams, Nate Solder's not going to be here forever, and they're going to need to eventually have somebody there at the other offensive tackle position. Not to mention, I wouldn't be so shocked if Reisner could play on the interior as well, but that's a whole nother story. And if I'm not taking him, I might take Devin Bush. There's a lot of options at 17. I believe if the Giants go pass rusher at 6. But as far as the quarterback position goes and why me and Nick differ at 6, I think that me and Nick are just a little off on Haskins. He's a little bit higher than I am on Haskins. And while I'm very high on Kyler Murray, I don't really foresee a formula for the Giants to get him in this draft class. I guess what I would say is even if the Cardinals don't take Murray at number 1, I think that somebody will. And I'm not so sure the Giants are going to be in the running to trade up for him. So I guess that's where I would stand right now. Michael Rossi asks, I'm not upset. Well, it's a question with a statement. I'm not upset that Odell Beckham is gone. I'm sad that the talent is gone. Did the Giants get enough back? Is this a full identity philosophy shift? How long until the Giants can be relevant again? Okay, I guess we've answered a lot of these questions already, haven't we, Nick?
Yeah, I think the overall value is not there. I think that, I'm a little more optimistic that it doesn't have to be some culture change. I think that they can be different 14 months from now, just as it was different 14 months ago. Although some people would say it's probably not. I think that, we kind of hit a lot of those points in terms of what the overall value of the trade was for sure.
And Andre asked us, do you believe the Giants actually keep number 6 and 17, or do you believe that they will trade up to number 1 because Gabe Gettleman has conviction on this year's Senior Bowl MVP?
It's a hard. I don't know. The only reason why is because you have to know what. Part of me thinks that their interest in Murray is genuine because he's a great football player. But I think that the better fit for a guy like Pat Shurmur is a guy that is a guy like Haskins. Does that mean it's the perfect fit? No, because I think they're kind of it's an either or. And I think it's going to depend on whether or not Arizona is going to take Murray, and then everything else kind of plays off of that. Because if Arizona doesn't take Murray, then you may not have 2 quarterbacks going in the first 6 rounds, the first 6 picks, I should say. That changes the game for a lot of the players, for a lot of the teams in those first 6 picks as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that's going to be the domino that kind of. I guess the word is starts the rest of the draft right. In that sense. As far as this question goes, I would be shocked if the Giants trade up for Daniel Jones with the number 1 pick. It would be really in my opinion, a devastating move for the franchise that could set them back for just like years to come, just based on my evaluation of Jones, which could be wrong. Who knows? Alex Lewin asks, let's say the Giants do trade the number 37 pick for Rosen. What is the best outcomes the Giants could come away with? Not what they will do, but what should they do if they stay put at 6 and 17? I guess we've kind of dove into this, correct?
Yeah. So now if you're on the Dan Schneider plan, and then let's say you're on the Dan Schneider plan, and that means that Rosen is that means that obviously Arizona is taking a quarterback.
Yep.
So like you're kind of vying at 6. I still think you could get whatever whether it's defensive lineman or defensive rusher at 6, and then yes, if you're still there at 17, then okay. Let's say that all plays out, and you get a great pass rusher at 6. And let's say it's the 13th pick, and Bush is still on the board. Then I would trade up and get Bush. that like then I would get aggressive there. Maybe you dump the third round pick that you had, whatever. You find a way. I would find a way to package that and actually move up if you're that kind of if you feel that way about it for sure.
No doubt about that, Nick. And Cody Kyer asks, "Well, how does this team look cap wise for 2020?" We went over that, but he also says, "What are the chances the Giants move up for Kyler Murray?"
Like I said, I want to say it's genuine. I would only throw it, and I feel like I'm like just throwing things in the wind here, but like 20 to 25% max. Like I just don't see it higher than that just because of the overall profile and the risk profile. But I think that the guy's that good of a player. I think that the odds are much more tilted towards Haskins.
I think the odds are definitely much more tilted toward Haskins too. If the Giants are going to take a quarterback in this draft class, I think most of that comes down to kind of the personality of each player from what I've seen and what the Giants traditionally look for at the quarterback position. But we'll find out. Stan McCune asks, based on the cornerback talent in this draft, where do you think Sam Beal would go if he was in this year's draft?
Second round. I mean, it's pounded out that, and I don't want to jump into this guy's shit, but like Greedy Williams is a great example. It's like, if I'm in the first round, I'm taking Greedy Williams. He could end up being a great cornerback. He's almost developmental in some ways.
Yeah.
And so that's where it's like I don't know. And he's kind of the number one. I think there's a lot of interesting stories, and I honestly can't remember their names at this point. It's been kind of a long day. In the third and fourth round type thing, but outside of that, it's notoriously and definitively the weakest part of this draft class.
Yep, agreed. And the Giants kind of lucked into that situation. Now, maybe it wasn't luck. Maybe, they're so far ahead. So thinking so far ahead, and this is probably way big of a stretch considering, what's gone down in the last 8 months or whatnot, but that they knew when they took Beal last year in the supplemental draft that their evaluation was the 2019 class was weak at cornerback. And I actually don't think it's too crazy to suggest that because I do believe that they have a lot of people working on this and working on multiple drafts, and they're not just looking one draft ahead at a time. So from that standpoint, the Giants, didn't get awful value when it comes to Beal. But obviously, all this is projection until we see Beal on the field and making plays for the Giants. Subwoofer asks, where do the Giants look for a number one wide receiver? We kind of dove into this. Nick's probably less risk adverse or less against the possibility of taking one in the first round. But I think even you, Nick, would say that you would be disappointed or you would view it as the wrong move to draft one in round one, correct?
I mean, the guy that comes to mind is Deebo Samuel, and that would be if he fell and you had some level where it's. I mean, yeah, maybe I'm just speaking out of turn here, but I think if you had a shot at getting him in the high second, maybe. But even then, I don't think so.
No. Yeah, I don't even want him with the 37th pick, Nick. Honestly, I'd rather just keep building out the trenches or finding somebody who can fill out some of those positions they need on defense. But I digress. John C. asks, do you think that Evan Ingram will finally see more plays as a wide receiver to make up for Odell Beckham being gone?
No, still think that he should be the move tight end / H-back / hybrid tight end and move more where basically there's an amoeba, whether they're in 12 personnel or they're in 21 personnel. It comes down to whether or not you view him as a fullback or not. And people, again, I've wrote a whole piece on this, and there's been a lot of smart high school coaches actually talking about the growth of this in my timeline, if you guys want to look there, and the growth with overall 12 personnel in general in the league. So, yeah, I definitely think that you need to have one of your tight ends to be flexible and a movable piece, and I think you can be that for the Giants.
Completely agree with that. And that's what what you just described is what I was hoping and expecting kind of that would happen in 2018. We don't know if it would have at some point happen because of the injury was so early in the season and kind of derailed this whole season. But moving forward, I think that we might see that. Gary Hartman asks, do you have any faith left in Dave Gettleman?
Yes, sure. Why not? I don't know.
I have faith left just based on how he evaluated the 2018 draft class and the players he made. Like I said, a lot of people who will hate on Gettleman no matter what happens, call Will Hernandez like the easiest pick to ever make. And that's, again, like I said earlier, I don't need to go back into this, but I think that comment is so stupid because 33 teams didn't draft him. And to me, he was easily I could name 5 to 10 players at least from that draft class I would have rather have him than, especially now looking back. So what I do have faith in Gettleman is an ability to evaluate certain positions. And for me, those positions are the positions that are most important to me. The trenches, the hybrid positions for James Bettcher's defense, and then obviously, hopefully, quarterback. That one, is more of a work in progress. We'll see where they go with that. But I do have faith that he'll put that decision in the, give more credence to that decision to Pat Shurmur, who I do have faith in when it comes to evaluating a quarterback, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Rob asks, I've been talking myself into trying to believe in what Gettleman was doing. Do you guys think that he knows what he's doing, or is it time to go full Ben McAdoo on him?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that probably went on behind the scenes, and who knows how functional the overall setup is. I know I'd say I don't, not trying to like really have an opinion there. I think it's a guess, and it's a guess because of the way that they keep it. And I'm not saying that they're really unique or different as an NFL organization, but it's just funny. Just to make a side point on this, like, have you ever listened to Chris Ballard talk for the Colts?
Yep.
The GM of the Colts, like. I don't know if guys want a little bit of like mental like stability, go fire up any speech or any press conference he has on YouTube. He's just kind of sane, and it's like at some point you think you're going to get that level of sanity back in the press conferences where it's just kind of like a back and forth, a dialogue that makes sense and is about football and isn't about basically all this other stuff.
Yeah, and just a quick point on Ballard, since you brought him up. I love what he's done this offseason. Colts entered free agency with like $100 million. He said, "Screw that! I'm not overpaying for any of these guys." He just re-signed Pierre Desera, the cornerback that they had. Kind of had a breakout season with them. But aside from that, there's been kind of no wasted money there, and I think he's building that roster out in the correct way. But on that note, that's all we have for today with the questions. Thanks again, guys, for sending in so many this week and making this show more interactive. We will be back very soon, pretty much the next time the Giants make a big move. And based on how this offseason has gone and based on how much movement the Giants have made from a personnel standpoint since Dave Gettleman took over, that could be as soon as next week. So on that note, we'll leave you with the usual send-off. Go Giants.